there's a possibility of reverter that's written into the contract, so the agreement, as well as into the actual deed, so there'll be no merger. So in either situation, you're protected. The obligation, we've got conditions before we can ever exercise the option. The project has to either be being constructed or completed construction, then the option could be exercised, and at that point,
What option is that you're talking?
the option would be to buy the 750 acre feet. To buy the 750 only. At any time, if that 750 acre feet is not used at the project. So if there was trying to be transferred, any type of change permit, if it was used in any way, the possibility of reverter is written into the deed. That'll be recorded in the county, as well as it's included in the documents. You've got two ways of protection. It reverts immediately back to the county. So it doesn't stay with the project. There is no ability, and I'll go back to your electric idea, there is no ability to sell these water rights. They can't be sold anywhere else. They have to only be used at the project. It's bound in every legal way I can do that, and then I always come back to you.
Likewise, if the concern about if 10 years down the road, the county wants to change the royalty, if it wasn't purchased, what if likewise the utilization isn't there, or the utilization is there, and there's an appreciated value to the water rights for the benefit of the county?
So you're saying 10 years from now, when we were ready to exercise an option,
Yes.
and you want to know if we'd be able to exercise the option or if you'd be able to change the price structure, is that what you're saying?
Yes.
No, as it is currently written, the price structure is as it is. It's at the current value as of now. We have the right to exercise at that price value when we're ready to exercise under the conditions that have been agreed upon.
And you guys have been working on this project since 2011. What's changed in the market in 2019 that has made it more feasible?
I can answer that. The biggest thing is, as Matthew just described, there's 43 of these projects in the United States. They were all built in conjunction with nuclear or coal by the government or by a utility. And what's really changed since 2010 or since 1993 when the last ones were built is that the lowest cost energy right now happens to be coming from solar and from wind. They have fixed energy costs for 20 or 30 years, but they're a variable resource. I mean, solar only produces energy when the sun is out, and wind only produces when it's windy. So it doesn't help with the grid, but it is the lowest cost. So the utilities, what's happening now is where they had paired them with nuclear that you can't ramp up and down, they use pump storage as that mechanism to manage the grid, is the utilities are now wanting to use large storage, energy storage, whether it's lithium-ion batteries or pump storage, to help manage that fluctuation of the grid. So the reason why this project now works, or is hopefully will work, is because we have really low-cost variable resources, solar and wind, that the utility then can push power into and have it over a long period of time.
And you mentioned surplus energy that will be utilized to pump the water up the vertical shaft into the upper storage pond, and that surplus energy is being generated by which means? Green energy also?
Well,
so in other words, we don't have the storage today for that, so we lose
right.
that energy? Is that what?
That's right.
Is that what's transpiring?
That's right.
And it could even be geothermal, which Nevada uses quite a bit. That's more of a base load, stable output. But in the middle of the day, when the solar is cranking out, that energy is not going to be very useful either. So it could be geothermal, or it could be energy that a utility buys off the market that happens to be cheap. There's some places that are seeing what's called negative pricing, where the price of electricity is going below zero. That means they'll pay you to take it. There's too much. So that's great for a project like this, right? Because we'll take it, pump with it, and then we can flip a switch and generate when it's needed. So
will the White Pine County residents see that benefit in their power bill at the power meter?
So Mount Wheeler Power, to the utility serving the area. You know, we talk about this in the other handout. I didn't talk about it here. So this question has come up. So if this was like let's say it was a solar project, it wouldn't be that hard to say, well, if Mount Wheeler wants a slice of the energy output, that could possibly be arranged and contractually. This type of project, so Mount Wheeler's peak demand of its whole system in a hot summer day is like 50-something megawatts. This project will be cranking out 1,000 megawatts. Number B, and it'll be operated however the grid needs it at any given time. So the need, and it's gonna be tied into the 500 kV transmission system. So it's gonna be a statewide balancing resource. It's hard, I mean, Mount Wheeler themselves would tell you this. It doesn't, they can't really use it. They can't really use it at the local level. We will need to buy energy from Mount Wheeler, because to run the lights and the air conditioning for this power plant, that level is gonna be like 3 megawatts, which is a pretty significant amount of energy. So we'll be a customer for sure. But the ability for a project like this, for a portion of it to be allocated to a local area is very difficult. So could it show up in the economics in the future if, as the Utah coal is retired, that Mount Wheeler uses? Because that'll be shut down someday too. And then the whole grid is benefiting from a project like this. It could financially help, because everybody's gonna be eventually trying to figure out, how do we keep the lights on when the solar is not there or the wind is not there? And this resource will be right in the middle of that whole grid, so.
So maybe I can proactively address another topic that has come up a couple times, and that's the economic impact of the project. It's still very early, so I hate to say we don't know a lot of the answers, but we don't. What we know is that there's a range of costs for the project, and we're trying to be as transparent as possible with all of these questions. And I think, Commissioner Carson, you've asked some of these questions directly, and we're answering them. So we have engaged public finance groups to do an economic impact study for the project. I think it's still a little bit early because we don't have the engineering and some of the steps that how many jobs are going to be created or as part of the construction side of it. We have a very clear idea of the permanent jobs because there's similar sized projects that we can pull from for the permanent jobs. So that's a pretty easy one to address. What we don't know is it going to be locally assessed or centrally assessed? Because we don't know the end ownership of the project. It really is incumbent on the utilities, whether it's NV Energy or CAISO from California or Pacific. If you imagine this area with the transmission lines that Matthew showed up there, then you're kind of in the middle of the hub of a spokes of a wheel that make up the energy grid of where this project fits in relationship to the western 13 states. So the reason why this is such a great project is because it's that hub in the middle of the western 13 states that are all connected together. You have Wyoming wind that can come down, you have southern Utah solar that can come over here, you have California solar, you have coal that could come from Bellamy, which is being retired. You have the ability to pull power in from lots of places and send power out to lots of places. But as a result, there's a lot of unknowns of who will end up being the beneficiary of the project, meaning owning it and managing that power system. The utilities as a whole look at 50 years in the future, and then they do look at 10 years in the future and 2 years, and so they're always planning in the future. This is part of the planning, is to have the ability to keep the transmission system really robust and operating so that you don't have catastrophes like what happened in Texas this last week or California last year with the rolling blackouts that they have. This kind of projects help keep the grid really robust and firm, or hard, as the term that they're using now, hardening the grid, making sure that it's winterized, making sure that you don't have these. So this is well located. So on the economic impact side of it, the ownership of the project affects whether it's centrally assessed or locally assessed. That's one thing, we just don't know that answer yet. The governors, what we did do was the Gemini Solar Project, which is located down in Clark County, is a really large solar project. It's 690 megawatts. We did pull that up, and there is the governor's renewable energy, I don't know what you call it, but incentive plan, I guess, that is for 3 years for a project. So while you're building a project, there's 3 years of sales tax, some relief in taxation, but it does have obligations associated with getting that governor's energy incentive, and that's that you pay over the prevailing wage. I think it's 130% of prevailing wage. So there's requirements that a project would have to get those incentives, which cost the project. So the Gemini Solar project is something that is the only thing that we can compare this project to right now, as far as scale goes. That project is 690 megawatts. It happens to be located on BLM property, similar to this project. It does have battery storage component to it, although it didn't address that specifically in the governor's submission. And that project is about $980 million, so let's call it $1 billion. Under the program that it has applied for in the 20-year governor's abatement, that $1 billion investment on BLM property, considering personal property and real property, is going to generate about $63 million of new tax for the state. 63 million of new tax over the 20-year period. So all we can do today, and I apologize if we don't have more detail, but we're just early, is take that structure and those numbers and use them and apply them to this project. So as an example, that's $1 billion project at 65 million, 63 million over 20 years. Ours would be $2 billion. So over the same 20 years, you would assume that it's going to produce $130 million over the first 20 years. And we're a 100-year asset, not a 30-year asset. So the governor's incentive only lasts for 20 years and then it runs out, and then you just pay whatever the regular taxes would be. And we're a 100-year asset. So anyway, I know it doesn't answer any specific questions because solar is also largely personal property, or real property, not personal property. I'm sorry, personal property, not real property. And this will be probably largely real property, not personal, because of all the civil work to it. But we are working on that, and it will be a process.
There's still 800 million in personal.
Yeah. Did that help answer, or did I confuse you more?
I'm trying to think when we did the Spring Valley Wind, and maybe Elizabeth, we can look and see if there's any, be able to apply any of that past information where we might end up. It was a wind project.
Yeah,
And I believe it was on BLM property when it was done, and that was back in 2010 and 11, right in there.
Yeah, I think the best resource, and we can send you, Matthew
And
found it.
honestly, Luigi, one of the reasons that I was hitting on that so hard was looking into the future right now with our legislative year, where there's a push to affect the Nevada Constitution in regards to the mining tax. We do depend heavily in respect to one-time monies to go towards projects for infrastructure that the community, our county needs. So if that takes a hit, let alone with COVID, not knowing so far as sales tax and where any of the county's revenues are going to come in at, as we move down or move into the future, that's where I was coming from in regards to that. I can probably dig up the development agreement with Spring Valley Wind, because they were tremendous good neighbors in regards to trying to mitigate the hit that the county took with the tax abatements.
Yep.
So.
Yeah, and this is much different than a wind project in the sense that we're, 6 years, 5 to 6 years of construction, several hundred people during that period of time, and then 25 people permanent with a 100-year useful life. So,
Yeah.
but we recognize that, and we won't have. This is forward planning, and I think from a county commission perspective of economic diversity in the community, both for water rights and for opportunity, is that I think the Robinson mine has a closure date. You know that that's not going to be here forever. this is a project that it's putting an ante on the table. There's no sure bet that this is gonna go, and that
Right.
we're spending, you know, millions of dollars, and we will continue to over the next several years, tens of millions of dollars. And from your perspective, it's putting an ante on the table. If the project's successful, the community should be successful as well. And you're not out of any money, well, the ante is riding on the table. But we want it, and then it's part of your community, like the Robinson Mine has been for the next 100 years. So where that one retires, a new one is born, and it's an opportunity for diversity. And then once the construction finishes, you know, what's the next idea that you can promote here?
But we seem to have a discussion about the water rights that are unused water rights in an existing closed basin, that we don't have all the facts on the actual cost to generate the electricity and what that benefit will be. Isn't that the gist of what we're discussing here?
We're discussing the project as a whole. The water rights, I think we had the appraisal done, so we know what the value of the water rights is for the project. We have the comparisons from the Robinson Mine, what they were paying. So for the water rights specifically, I think that's been defined. We did have the meeting last night with the water board, and so I don't know that I think that's been addressed.
Right, and Luigi, I think that basically what we heard last night also was the biggest concern was having any negative impact to Steptoe Valley, where we are basically have been in drought conditions. And the public needs to know and be assured that you are going to do whatever studies will take care of those concerns. So far as what impacts, negative impacts there might be. And you guys have talked about like filling the basins. You don't have to do that necessarily all at once. So far as stress testing in regards to what it's going to do to the closest pivot well. You know, things like this is what they've talked about doing so far as the concerns of the public, so far as the drawdown.
So with respect to the geology, is the rock competent? Are the tunnels lined or are they unlined? And what about any fractures or fissures if the rock is not competent? And what happens to the aquifer and the snowpack in the mountain range?
Yeah, so that's why the geotech, the boreholes, because we have geological maps that indicate the type of rock, but without the borehole data, which can be logged and tested at every foot of those tunnels to see that's exactly what they're gonna be looking at. Fractures, the quality of the rock, the strength of the rock.
Are they unlined? I'm sorry, are they unlined? They are unlined bores?
It depends, like I would say on the tailrace side, on the alluvial, or the limestone, probably lined. I think that's the plan, to line that. Whether it needs to be lined in the quartzite, it depends on what the tests show. And that's the high pressure side. Once it gets past the powerhouse, it's low pressure, because the turbines take out all the force. So that is of special concern, is that higher pressure side and characterizing that rock, and it is often lined. There's only relatively few unlined tunnels and pump storage where the rock is so good that you don't have to line it. But lining also helps reduce friction, and friction takes away efficiency. So lining will be an extensive part of that system. And you asked about the economics of the energy too. If we do have a good idea that if the project continues to be at the price, well, we think it's going to be at this 2.2 billion for 1,000 megawatts with 8 hours of storage, and that's what I didn't mention, 8 hours. So if the upper reservoir is full and you were generating at full power, you would have 8 hours of that much power generated. You could run it at half and go 16 hours, but those economics seem to be working given where the market is going. That it's either going to be batteries and what's the cost of batteries and what's their lifespan versus this type of project. And the distinct advantages that we have over batteries is A, the lifespan. Batteries don't last 80, 100 years. If you cycle the batteries up and down a lot and you run them low, they wear out faster and they lose their efficiency faster and they only last 5 years. This plant will not suffer from that at all. You could run it completely to dry. Well, you would have some water left in the system, but you could run it up and down as much as you want and not wear it out or affect the efficiency or anything. So when we look at the economics, look good. But ultimately what we need to get it built is a power purchase agreement, an offtake agreement from a utility, because you can't build one of these without that. Because nobody's gonna risk spending all that money just to buy low and sell high. That's too risky. So,
Do you have that agreement in place?
not yet, but we are marketing. We start marketing from the very beginning. When we find a project that looks good, we start talking to utilities. And we say, are you interested? Could you be interested? But they're like, well, how far are you along the road? Do you have a FERC license? Well, no, we're working on that. Okay. What about engineering? How far are you? This cost number, 2.2 billion. How certain are you of that? What's the plus minus range of uncertainty? Right now, it's called a class 4 cost estimate, which is plus 30%, minus 30. It's wide.
60%
So-
spread.
So we have to narrow that. The way we narrow it is by doing more engineering, more details, more line items, get the engineering and construction bids in 3 years from now, and then we go, okay, now we finalize, but along the way, we're marketing, and the investor who's putting all the money in, they're gonna wanna know that there's a market too, otherwise their money's down the drain, so. That's that part of it, but we're very good at that. And we talk with utilities all over the country about our different projects, and we know how to speak their language and what they need, and we look at their forecasts, and so we feel like there's a good market for this.
I have a question. So, I'm looking at this. Step forward and announce my name? Dr. Clinton Henry. So, I'm looking at this on a personal level, since that's kind of where we've kind of come down to this. And I want to ask you, gentlemen, would you put this out your back door, look at it, and live underneath it? Would you do it day in, day out, from here on and forever? Because as soon as you put it there, it's there. I also have the concern of my livelihood depends on water too, not the rest of the country in their power. Without water, I'm dead. I've been here a long time. So, if you see our concerns and we talk about, we're more focused on the water. It's not like we've got a river out here. It's a finite source that we all know and we've all fought dearly for. So when you're thinking about this and you're putting it all forward, think about your daughters, think about your sons, and if their livelihood depended on what's under the ground, is it still a good idea in your heart?
Yes. I would say yes, I would live below it, and I would still do it. And we understand the concern about the water and that it is a big component here, it is your livelihood. I think what we're talking about is, the construction is a limited period of time. The fill, what we haven't talked about, although you mentioned a little bit, is we do have lots of flexibility on when that fill occurs, which would be the biggest single consumption time of that 5,000 acre feet. That we have flexibility in that, and we, with the community, we wouldn't do it when you guys are doing your second cutting of alfalfa and need to irrigate and the water table is down. Like, we'll wait till the rains come in the wintertime or in the spring when there's a big watershed.
I wish we had rain this year.
Well, I mean, but you understand that we have flexibility and we know that farmers don't have flexibility. And so what you have to irrigate the crops when they need to be irrigated and you need to cut when they need to be cut. We don't, when we do that initial fill, we have the flexibility to work with the community. And I'll say, I talked about I do solar development and wind, and we deal with this because I deal with farmers and ranchers on all of my projects, is that we want to be part of the community and let that last cut happen, or not have you order seed for the next year, you know, if it was a solar field on property, as an example. But so we have flexibility with the fill, the initial fill, which is the only time that is, I think, it would really have an adverse effect on the community and the water rights. And then the 750 acre feet that would be for the ongoing evaporation, it's the same thing. If there is a water shortage and it's a drought that goes on, you know, over the course of a year, we could work, and this could be something that could be included in the CPs, the conditions precedent to approving the project, that we fill the reservoir back up in a season that there's more water than less, so that we refill that evaporated portion in, say, February or March, when the snow runoff is coming and you have water that's going to waste. We fill it up and then we do it, and then you have the water for the agriculture for the rest of the season, so.
I wouldn't say we waste water in this country. Anything the Lord gives us runs in the ground, I hope.
But you understand what I'm saying, is that when it's running off the mountains and going down the creek beds and out of the county, like, we could, that could be something that you could impose on the project to say, for the fill, for the 750, don't do it in August, September, you know, whatever, June, July, August, and September, because there is a challenge with water here. And we would be okay with that, again, because we have more control over when that time could
See,
happen.
Luigi, I like you, but you're gonna sell it to somebody else.
That's why you put it in the contract. You say, as a condition to this water sale, we need you to use the 750 acre feet for fill during these months, you know? And that's something that it would be totally reasonable to include. And then it doesn't matter if it's me sitting here or somebody else. So I think that's a really good point. So we just added something to put on there that is,
Which answer question, you want that in this agreement, or you want it in the conditions precedent included in what?
I think it should be in the-
agreement?
I think it should be in the conditions precedent, but I'm open.
I
to
can fit other places, it's just where I want to understand where you want it. Do you want it in a CDA, and you want it in the SUP that would have to get approved by the county in the long term? Or do you want to actually put it within this agreement itself, the water agreement?
Well,
My preference is the conditions precedent, but
I think it's harder to govern, once the water rights are sold to the project. And we're talking, the project is built, the water rights, the 750 are sold to the project. I think it'd be harder to govern personal property that we own, that somebody else owns. That would be like me telling you what you can do with your water, where it'd be easier for them to impose the obligation on the project by the county. And so the CPs, the county would be the place, or the condition precedent.
Yeah.
And if I can say legally, I think we have to, because when we take full fee simple ownership in an option water right of 750 acre feet, we can't have that condition put onto it.
That's right.
But instead, you could force it on us through the county development agreement or a condition precedent, that anytime we use it, basically within the county, you've got that governance over the top of us. That is, your district attorney would know better, so I can't speak for you. But my point of view, that works better for us. I think that's the best legal way for the county as well to defend itself, because otherwise we're gonna be dealing with fee simple ownership of a water right, and you can't dictate into it how that's used. So you can dictate it instead by your regulations in the condition precedents.
But what about if that was dictated as a part of the application from the state engineer's office?
State engineer.
Yes.
If
He
you
can
put it in,
dictate when you do your change application, he can determine when your period of time for use
for,
is.
you wanna just basically restrict our usage? Yeah, we could do that.
I mean, I'm just saying that's another one that would come in here, then you're passing it on if it does sell to another project developer, or it's in the water rights, that is the way it's used.
Yeah.
Okay, I'm fine with that as well.
That's fine. It's an encumbrance on the water rights.
Yeah.
Is that what you wanted to add?
Yes, well, I have another question on your
Could you
change
state
application.
your name?
Greg Rivero, 1040 Mill Street. On your change applications, I did hear, he did say he's gonna change the point of diversion. So the manner of use and the place of use is all covered under your current applications? I mean, your current,
Place of use will have to be changed as well. It'll be
Yeah.
POD and POU that'll be changed.
both?
Manner of use or beneficial use will not, because it's already listed as industrial. So we feel that we can follow within that as well.
So they will go public.
The state journal has to, yeah.
Yeah, it'll be 4 weeks, and then the public will have a chance to file a protest or or whatever.
Is it all the change applications? Absolutely.
Yes.
Go ahead, Travis.
Yeah, just, and this is already in place, but we strengthened it up. A year or so ago, brought before the board and passed unanimously